Guys, today I have two very important announcements. The first one is Sober October's over. And I won my competition by running 172 miles with my friends. We were seeing who could run the furthest. Cheers, motherfuckers. Number two, I'm presenting the full exoskeleton today. Look at that thing. This is the first time I've done this. This is the first time I'm showing this off. Just take a second and look at how fucking beautiful that is. I am so excited. This is kind of a big video for me, so some of you guys may be seeing this video for the first time. I make daily videos, so my videos are not super polished and shiny. They're a little bit coarse and rough around the edges because I'm not really a filmmaker. I'm a guy who builds awesome shit. So that's the suit, and then I just turn on this 3D scan. The purple guy is me. If I turn off the head really quick, you'll be able to see the likeness. Yeah, there you go. You can see that's definitely me. I got this 3D scan done by a local place in Denver. It's really cool. They bounced a bunch of light off of me and made this scan of me, and they gave it to me, and then I built on top of this a skeleton that was just a bunch of drawings inside of Fusion 360, which is the software that I use, that had all the axes of rotations of the entire joint, of all the joint systems for the entire body. And the way this thing works is way this thing is gonna work is there's all these joints in here. Like if I just grabbed one and showed it to you real quick, I'm gonna show you guys all the joints of the entire body. I have some kind of cool animations of the entire thing moving, but that right there, for instance, is the arm moving down. So you can see that's obviously not in line with me anymore. So these are all jointed, and I have this theory for designing exoskeletons. I call it Dylan Emston's theory of aligned axes of rotation. What that means is essentially that you can build this exoskeleton, you want it to line up with all the different axes of rotation of your body. So if you had your shoulder, you would want it to line up. The only way to really do that, there's only two ways to really do that. One is the way your body does it, to actually be inside your body and have joints, in this case a ball and socket joint that moves in there. Obviously, exoskeletons can't be inside your body, so the other way to do it is to set up a bunch of different axes of rotations and have them all offset at 90 degrees. So in this case, there's like one here, and then there's one here, and then there's another one in here that slides. And this sliding one is really hard to see because it rotates around, and that one's a bit complicated. We'll show it in a second, but this one's pretty easy to see, and that one right there is pretty easy to see. So those are two axes of rotations, and so by doing that, the center of all those axes are right at the center of my actual joint. So this suit will not change length in relation to me. If you look at some other exoskeletons on the market, there's a company called Sarcos, and they have probably the most impressive one. And I say most impressive because mine's way more badass than theirs. But if you look up theirs essentially has to get like, because it runs on the outside of the body, would have to get longer as you lifted your arms up, and it has to accommodate by like bringing the suit out like this when your arms are straight. It's kind of weird. It's cool, but kind of weird. Not like what I'm doing. Mine won't change length at all, and it fits me perfectly. And I don't have to do any fancy kinematic models to make it fit me. It'll just fit me, which is really helps on the software side of things and with actuation and stuff. Let me tell you how I'm going to actually build this particular suit. This is the Mark I, which is the naming convention of Tony Stark. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And essentially what's going to happen is I'm having this built for me. If I were to have it machined with like a CNC mill, it would cost me like $1 million. So what I did instead, you'll notice all these parts are flat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it cut out, water jet cut out of aluminum. And then 6061 aluminum was the highest strength weldable aluminum you can get. And then I'm going to weld it all together. I'll throw a quick clip up on screen of me welding some awesome shit. I have one of the coolest welding shots on YouTube, I'm pretty sure. And when I say coolest, I mean I have actual picture of the arc, like of the molten metal. There's not really good footage of that unless it's through a hood. That's how they normally get it. But mine is like color, like the actual color. It looks better on the camera I shot than it actually looks through a hood. It's pretty fucking cool. I'll show it again one more time just so you get to see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through, and then I'm going to take and cold forge, meaning with a hammer, take a thinner sheet of metal. This is all going to be cut out of 1/8 inch, except for some spacers that are going to be 16 thousandths of an inch thick to get the joints to work right. But most of the bulk of it is going to be cut out of 1/8 inch aluminum. And then I'm going to go through and after it's welded, I'm going to cold forge a thinner gauge of aluminum. I'll probably use a couple different gauges. And then I'm going to cover in a whole bunch of these holes you see in here. So you see, as it looks right now, it looks really cool, but it doesn't look like super solid. That's because a lot of these parts are going to be covered in. Like one of the big spots you can see, like this part in here, all the way around all these struts in here is going to be covered in a piece of sheet metal. Same thing like down in here, all of this is going to be covered in sheet metal, and then like all of this is going to be covered in sheet metal. So not all the holes, like I'll show you the gaps that won't be covered. The parts that won't be covered are the back of my knees. Inside here, this won't be covered, and then most of inside of like here. And those are, and then also on the inside of the elbows won't be covered as well. And that's just a kind of a artifact of how suits are made and how they work, and it's just very difficult to cover those and still keep your range of motion. So essentially, like what I'll probably do in like future videos is have a compressive armor, like what they do with like some really cool medieval armors where they were completely covered in metal. I can probably do that, some stuff like that but I'm going to do that on the Mark II. This is just to break me out of the cave. It doesn't have to be perfect. So keep that in mind. Like, and for that matter, like the entire top of this head will be completely covered in metal for sure. So all those gaps in there, all these little struts, they get everything into the right place and make sure everything's in the right place. Also, by the way, if you're curious, if you're a machinist, you're like, wonder what the tolerance is on this. The tolerance on this is about 12 thousandths of an inch, so it's pretty shaky. It's like probably looser than car parts, and car parts are really shaky. So it'll be a pretty loose suit. But that's good because I'm going to be welding it, and welding it introduces a lot of warping into metals, and that warping can pull parts a little bit. So having a pretty, if I had built this at like let's say 3 thousandths of an inch of tolerance, a little bit of heat from my TIG torch could cause this thing to warp, and then it wouldn't fit together anymore. So it's actually a good thing to make this kind of wide and kind of sloppy. I made an old version of this I made like a prototype of this. Didn't have the double layer design, which I need to talk about, but out of 3D printed plastic, and that was very sloppy. So, and that thing worked pretty well. I'll put a link to that so you can see it if you want. But that was a pretty sloppy system, and it still worked pretty well. So having a 12 thousandths of an inch tolerance is just fine. The other thing you need to know about this is that there's 2 layers to the suit. There's a deep layer and a superficial layer. I use a lot of anatomical terms in how I explain the suit, and that's because they're exact and it helps me understand. And when I thought about just like maybe trying to dumb it down, but then I realized you guys are fucking smart. You'll get it if I talk about it. You'll get it long after a while, especially if I kind of explain it as I go. So I use anatomical terms to explain most of these things. Anyway, deep and superficial. The reason for that is so if you look here, for instance, you'll see there's the superficial part and there's the deep part. So there's essentially 2 exoskeletons on this thing, which is pretty crazy. And then they line up. And then the reason for that is because there's going to be exomuscles, which are these artificial muscles. I will also put a link to those so you can see what those are all about, that run in between those. And those things are essentially this funny looking thing right here. And what this is there's this hole right here. And these right here, this is one of my early prototypes of the exomuscle. And what this is, I'll give you the short version if you don't want to go watch the video. What this is a Kevlar sleeve that works a lot like, I know I got this shitty 2012 Mac I'm doing this on, by the way. Camera is, this is a woven Kevlar sleeve, and it looks a lot like a Chinese finger trap. And if you see it, I push it, it'll get fatter and shorter. And inside of this thing is a bladder, a hydraulic resistant bladder. And so when you push hydraulic fluid into it, it gets fatter and it gets shorter. And it contracts just like a natural muscle would. We're very similar to it. Not exactly like, but very, very similar. It gets shorter and contracts. This thing right here, this thing weighs nothing. This thing produces 5 tons of force with 3,000 PSI, which is what this is rated to. Not very much tolerance for error, but it could go to 3,000 PSI. It'll produce 5 tons of force of that, which is a fuck ton of force. 8 of these can lift a semi-truck off the ground. They're crazy. And then this design right now had like a metal anchor on it, but what's going to happen is there's going to be a little bit of a different system. It's going to have a little thing like this at the end, and that's going to be like an anchor. So this is going to essentially just dipped my thing in my booze. That's unfortunate. What this thing is going to do is essentially it's going to come out like this, and it's going to come out to where there's no bladder in it. And it's just going to be like essentially a tendon, and this tendon would go through this hole right here, and then these things are going to be all over the suit. And then the reason for having the double layer is that it, I'm still going to drink it. It doesn't look that bad. The reason for doing that is because these things produce so much force, it has to be supported on both sides. And that just makes it a lot stronger than trying to have like a really strong piece and then have it on the outside. It'll bend and break that thing, and it just won't work very well. So having it supported on both sides is important. And so that's what that is all about. And then I might actually go in and reinforce it with some fiberglass. I'm actually going to have to do that because it still will exceed the strength of aluminum. So I'm going to come in and reinforce it with some structural S fiberglass. But that is how that's going to work. And so these exit muscles, excuse me, are all through here. So that's one, that's one, that's one, that's one. This one's turned off, so you can see how the holes kind of mount. And then they actually rotate inside of here. And so if I grab this here and move it, you'll see they actually rotate a little bit, which is pretty cool. And the reason for that is that they will always be lined up and pulling directly in the direction of the force of the muscle, which is really important because although Kevlar is very strong, it can cut fairly easy. So if you pull it around, especially at like really high force, like what I'm putting on, if you pull it around like a sharp corner, it'll cut the Kevlar. And I actually figured that out the hard way when I was doing a lot of the R&D in these, which unfortunately I didn't have a YouTube channel at that point, so I didn't record any of that, but it took me probably 60 prototypes to get this thing to work. No shit, like literally 60 prototypes to get that thing to work. It would cut them if you had sharp corners, so you had to make sure the corners were rounded in that prototype. But anyway, having the anchor also point wherever it's pulling, especially if it's something that's dynamic like your pec, those move all around a lot. Having them be able to turn and follow the direction of force is really important for them to not cut and rip out. So that's how those are designed. All right, guys, I think you get the theory of how this works. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to turn off this body here, so it's just the exoskeleton. You'll be able to understand what's happening. I'm going to make me just a little smaller here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you the movements of this thing and kind of how it works. So I have these motion simulations. I'm going to start with the trunk, and if you're a fan of the channel, you may have seen a couple of these before, but that's okay. They're still cool. And I'm going to show you kind of how this thing moves. So if we zoom in on the head here, it's kind of a chaotic motion. I was sort of figuring out how this, when I made this initial one. But you'll see it has 3 ranges of motion. Oh, I realized there's actually, before I show you that, I know I gave you a little teaser and I showed you a little bit of the neck moving. Before I show you that, I wanted to show you guys one interesting thing about how this goes together. And that is that for this thing, how it bolts together, if you look here, there's a bolt hole there and a bolt hole there. This is going to be, this inner smaller one right here is going to be tapped, and then there's going to be a countersunk bolt that goes in there. And so you're probably wondering, like, how the fuck are you going to get in and out of this? It comes in pieces. So, like, this is the back piece, this is the front piece of the superficial one, and the same thing is going on with the deep one. So the stuff on the front and on the torso will come in 4 different parts. You'll step in to the ventral part, which is the back part of the deep exoskeleton, and then the dorsal part, and then the ventral part will come forward of the deep exoskeleton, and then the dorsal or the ventral and the dorsal part of the superficial exoskeleton will both come together. 4 parts, and that's true for the torso, the lumbar, and the pelvis, and then a little bit true on the arms. There's still 2 layers, but there's only 1 inner layer, not 2 inner layers on the inside of the arms, so you can kind of get your arms down. Same with the inside of the legs, so you can get your legs close together. But what I wanted to tell you is that there is 57 degrees of freedom, and so a degree of freedom is like on the shoulder, there'd be forward and backward is shoulder girdle, up and down, that's 2, so forward and back 1, up and down 2, like this is 3, like this is 4, and then internal and external rotation is 5. That's 5 degrees of freedom just for your shoulder girdle mechanism. So there are 57 degrees of freedom on the entire suit. That is given by 140 individual joints. So to tell you how I counted that, this would be 1 and that would be 1. The superficial and the deep would both be 1. And then 1, 2, 3 on the on this motion. So that's how I counted that. And then the number of bolts to get me in and out of this, which I think is crazy, is 158 bolts. And that's all the bolts to put these on. And then also there's bolts that come in and anchor in all the anchors as well. And so for all the anchors plus all the bolts to actually put the suit on, that's 158 to get in and out of the suit. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be really absurd. And most of the Mark 1 is not super easy to put on. That's just how it is. and Iron Man to get it to where he could just step into a suit and wrapped around him until like Mark fucking, I think it was 7. Yeah, that's the one in the Avengers movie. It was Mark 7. So I have 7 tries to get that out. This one can be really hard to get in and out of. It'll still be really cool. And then the second one will hopefully be a little bit easier. And the third one easier than that. That's kind of how it's going to go. Let me show you this motion I started showing you guys before I went to tell you that. So again, there's the motion of the head. I know we saw it for a second, but there it goes. And so you'll see there's 3 degrees of freedom. There's this way and this way. I'm going to make myself just a little bit bigger so you guys can see what I'm saying. There's this way and this way, side to side, and then up and down like that. So those 3 degrees of freedom give you the full range of motion of the neck. Eventually, like way in the future, you get it to where you could have that same thing going on across multiple of your spinal columns, because the spine is like just a little bit of motion from a lot of different vertebrae that all adds up to this motion. Mine would be essentially just all moving around one vertebrae, except for these two. There's 2 degrees of freedom here. There's one at the base and one at the top, which is your atlas joint here, and there's one at the base. There's 2 degrees of freedom here that add up, and then one this way, and then one this way. The next one we're going to look at is the shoulder joint, which is probably the most complicated joint in the entire suit. I think this one is actually missing 1 of the degrees of freedom, so keep in mind this is not even entirely complete. So this is pushing the shoulder girdle forward and then back, and then I think we already did up and down, yep, and then now this is coming down like this, and then it's going to come up like that, and then it's going to, and no, we got it, they're all in there. This one's going to internally and externally rotate like this, so this would be going like, this would be essentially going like this. For whatever reason I have it up like this, so it's kind of weird, but this would be internally and externally rotating right there. It's going to come back down, it's going to go up to the side, like this, and then it's going to come back forward again, so that's pushing forward like this, and then pulling back. And then it's going to kind of come down and do this thing where it sweeps through a couple ranges of motion, but you'll see that's the shoulder girdle depressing, so that'd be going like this. They're really pushing your shoulders down, like if you're doing like a dip or something on gym rings or something like that, and then it comes back up. This range of motion right here, and then it comes back down, and there's 5 degrees of motion in this. Your entire arm attaches at one little, the bony attachments. There's a lot of ligament attachments and muscle attachment, but as far as bone on bone, it's 1 point right here. Both your arms attach essentially, and they move around one axis, which is literally like right in the center of your body, which is how mine is done. And your entire arms attach right here with bones. It's why you have such a huge range of motion of your arms. It's also why it's so easy to get a shoulder injury, because there's a lot going on in that joint. And this right here was by far the hardest thing to figure out in the entire suit, is getting all of these motions out of the suit. You'll see this thing isn't perfect. It kind of bumps into itself, obviously. Wouldn't happen if you're actually wearing the suit, because you bump into it and it would stop. But you'll see the crazy range of motion of this thing and how difficult it was. One thing you'll notice is not all these holes in here. I don't have actually all the exomuscles placed in here yet, but just know that that's what these holes are. And then if you see red, I have those exomuscle anchors red, so you'll see those in there. But if you also see these double holes right here, that's also where an exomuscle anchor goes. So just something to keep in mind as you're watching this and trying to figure out what's going on. The next one we're going to look at is your lumbar, and that is the motion of your torso relative to your pelvis. So the lower part of you to the upper part of you doing all this kind of motion like this. So there you'll see side to side motion like that, and then it'll turn like this, and those are on slider joints. There's 3 different types of joints in the suit. This is a great example of the slider joints. Let me zoom in here a little bit and let you guys watch that. That is slider joint motion. So this is where, so this kind of joint in here and in here is a hinge joint. And those are a little bit stronger, and they're more of what you think about in in like a typical joint, where it's like a round part moving around a round part. So this would be kind of the motion of a hinge joint. Be very strong because it's supported in all areas. But this sliding in here, which is not doing right now, it's tilting forward and backwards on hinge joints, like I just said. Those are strong joints. These joints in here are a little bit weaker, but there's 4 of them, actually 8 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then so 4 on the front, 4 on the back. There's 8 of them. So it's still very strong. I mean, and aluminum is actually very, very strong. So it's still strong. It's just not as structurally sound as a hinge joint. But there's just no other way to do it, because you'd have to put the hinge joint literally above your head, which doesn't make sense, right? So you have to figure out a clever way to get it around your body, and the way to do that is by these sliding joints, and here's that motion right now. So watch this. That's what I'm talking about. That motion right there is the slider joint motion, and so those things slide around each other, and they're all moving around that center point. And now we're going back to hinging back and forth for this motion. And so you get 3 ranges of motion, just like the neck, one here, and then one forward and backwards. Except you actually have 2 degrees of freedom, again here, one there, and one there, for the forward and backwards, because I'm trying to, well, I just think that makes it better and to do it. And it is also a good way to design it. So there's 2 in the forward and back, which is what's happening right now, forward and back. And then the rest of them, there's 1 for this way, and then 1 for the side to side. The next one we're going to look at a little bit more briefly, this is a little bit of a more simple design, is that of the pelvis. And the pelvis is this thing down here. So your pelvis is your bones of your lower body. Your pelvis is what Elvis swings. That's how they taught it to us in grade school. So Elvis moved his hips. It's your hips. So this is the motion of your hips. So there is the leg coming up. It's just, I just have one leg in there. All of this is actually just, all the limbs are done on one side of the body. So there's the leg coming back and forth like that on this hinge joint right here. And then now there's a hinge joint on the back that's bringing them in and out. So you see how they're coming in, and they're coming in really far because I built this before I had the legs on there. So the legs just move through each other, but that's okay. You get the idea. So that would allow you to step over your legs as you're walking like this. So because you step pretty much right in line with the other one as you step. So that allows you to do that. There it is again. So that's that motion. And then you have a hinge joint on the back, and then you have a very thin dainty joint coming through to the front to give it a little bit of extra support in the front. But that's a sliding joint in there because I don't want it interfering with the leg coming up like it is right now. So this allows us to come all the way up to 90 degrees, or just slightly under 90 degrees. So it comes up pretty far enough to stomp someone in the face with your foot. Maybe actually you might have to bring your leg a little bit higher to do that. So I probably won't be able to do an awesome front foot stomp with that. I have to figure out how to kick in this thing. I do martial arts. I've done martial arts my entire life, and so I'm thinking about how I would actually fight in this thing, because it limits range of motion quite a bit. You see, that's how far your leg comes up. It's pretty good. It's not terrible, but it's probably not high enough to do a front foot stomp. But that's okay. We'll find another way to beat someone's ass. I am thinking about maybe potentially hiding a knife on the arm somewhere. It'd be pretty fucking cool. Anyway, let's move on. So that was everything on the trunk moving. The next thing we're looking at is the arms. The trunk is your head to your groin, so everything but your limbs. So you have your limbs, which is your arm, your leg, then you have your trunk. So that was all the trunk. So now we're going to look at the arm going through some of its range of motion. So here the arm, and we're just going to zoom in on this arm a little bit. So here the arm is, well, now it's bending, and it's going to turn like this. So this is doing this motion right now. Internal pronation, supination of your arm, and then it's going to come forward, and then you're going to see this motion, which we saw again earlier. Now we're seeing it from a different angle. Well, it's still forward. I should have put that at a different angle, so you got it from 2 different angles, but I didn't. So there it's coming in, and now it's going to come up, and it's going to rotate again like this, internal or pronation, supination of your hand like this. It'll straighten back out, and then now it's going to pronate and supinate out like this. So now you're out from that angle doing that, and then it'll bend up again. Or now I guess it's going to straighten and do something weird. I'm pretty good with Fusion 360. I'm not the best. Actually, I am pretty fucking good. I'm going to do I'm going to do a series of videos on how I actually design this stuff and how I make it. I've been thinking about that. It's a how-to video I'd actually like to make. So I think I'm going to do that at some point. But this motion is pretty cool. You actually couldn't do that this close. Your arm would have to be out a little bit further to do it because it's going to run into the torso. But you'll see there's quite a bit of range of motion in this thing. Like quite a bit. I mean, pretty much every range of motion that you have in your body, you have in this suit. That's pretty important to understand. Now, it limits range of motion because the suit runs into itself, because it's not that slim. Like I said, it's the Mark I. It's a bit bulky. But it's going to get thinner in the future, but this has all the ranges of motion as a human body would, which is pretty fucking cool. It's no one's done this before. That's like something you should understand. No other company has ever built anything like this before. I'm the first to do this. Trust me, I know. I've been to exoskeleton conferences. I've talked to a lot of people in the industry. I'm obsessed with the thing. I've studied it. No one else is doing this. No one else is doing something like this where it's a fully metal jointed thing that it can support if it's actuated, it'll be able to support weight all the way to the ground, because if you pick something up in your hand up here, it'll put it all the way down to the ground. This metal is actually going to be standing on the ground, just like I'm going to be standing on the ground. In fact, there's going to be a piece of rubber that goes in between this that I'm going to build, and my feet are going to sit on it, and the exoskeleton is going to sit on the same piece of rubber. The rubber is going to be running around the perimeter of my foot, and then I'm going to be standing on it. So when you're picking something up here with your arm doing bicep curls, that load is being transferred through all the mechanical joints all the way to the ground. You won't even feel it. You won't feel it anywhere on your body, which is awesome. It is truly a full body exoskeleton, and if you're familiar with exoskeletons, you'll know that's rare. And by rare, I mean literally no one else is fucking doing that. The next one we're going to look at, probably the most jointed part of the suit, is the hands, and not the most complicated. Like I said, the shoulder girdle is the most complicated. Not probably, is the most complicated. This may be the second most complicated part for me to have figured out. So we're going to run through the full range of motion. I like this part a lot. I think it looks and works really well. So there, it's curling the fingers down. Now this is like a mitt design, because the thickness of this metal, the 1/8 inch, was not thin enough for me to get in between the fingers. I really needed a thinner gauge metal to do it the way I'm doing it now, or I just need, sorry, you guys might be having trouble seeing that. We put that in the middle for you. Or I just needed a CNC mill or something to be able to do this kind of stuff, so I can't do it. So here you're seeing the side-to-side motion, and then now you're going to see this way and this way. And you'll notice that these are two different joints that are sliding around inside of each other. There's a linkage piece in between them, and they're actually moving around two different axes of rotation. That's because in your wrist, your carpal bones, the way they move, there's actually two different axes of rotation. And so the idea with this is to mimic that, to make it as smooth as possible on those movements. So here the fingers are curling again. I want to talk about the thumb, so I'm going to wait for it to get back to there. And so you'll see it, they're flipped 90 degrees to each other. So you have this way, which is that right there, and then you have this way, and those are both moving around the same axes. And then now the fingers are going to curl down, so that would be your entire hand. And then the thumb is moving around a single point right here, so that joint right there, which is this joint right here. It's where your thumb attaches to your hand, and that is kind of way up in your hand. It's pretty deep in there, and so that was a tricky thing to figure out as well. And that allows for this motion right here. This motion right here is what you call opposition. Opposable thumbs, that's what that means, the ability to come across like that. You'll notice I have opposition. This joint can sweep out all the way up to here. There's not actually a limit on how far this can go. This thing can go, as it's going right now, really far. Let me go from the other side. So see, this is it bending, so you have this motion going on right here. That's it bending, and then you're going to see opposition again. This comes down, and I have it only going to like right about there, but in theory it can go all the way over. There's not a limit on how far that joint can go. This is another thing was pretty complicated to figure out, but is really cool, that articulating thumb. There's let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 axes of rotation just for the thumb. There's a lot of joints in this. I think there's something like 12. There's like 12 different joints just for the hands, and that's not even each individual finger being actuated. And then what's going to happen here is there's going to be some kind of fabric that's wrapped around the palm, so you'll be able to actually tactilely feel things that you feel, so you'll be able to like feel pressure and stuff, which is going to be really helpful for you to actually be able to interact with the world and touch things. But then you'll have on the outsides, on the perimeter, you'll have that metal that can come in, and then the idea is that these points right here to come in and actuate it, so where you could actuate it with like thousands of pounds of force. So you could grab something really hard and you'd still be able to feel what you're grabbing, but then all the way around your hand you'll have this extra high force being able to grab it and hold it. It'll be really surreal because you'll have like thousands of pounds, literally thousands of pounds if I put actuators on this, to be able to clutch something with, but then you'll still be able to have the fidelity of your fingers to actually feel and touch it, which is going to be really, really cool and very surreal. And frankly, I'm going to feel like a goddamn superhero wearing this. It's going to be really cool. let's look at the very last range of motion I got for you guys, which I have the entire lower body all put in to one. So here we have the leg moving around. And there you have internal and external rotation. You may have missed that, but now the leg is coming up. And now internal and external rotation of the shank is occurring. And there's a locking mechanism that actually locks that out when your leg is straight. That's how your biology works. You can check it and play around with your body if you want. But you lose the ability to internally and externally rotate your leg as that happens. And then there's a side-to-side motion of the foot, and now the toes are coming up. I missed some of the foot, so we'll watch it through one more time so I can explain what's happening here. So there's that way, and then that way. So this is pronating and supinating the foot, and then pointing the toes, bringing them back up. Internally and externally rotating at the knee, and then that leg is going to come down, and then it's going to internally and externally rotate at the hip, just like that. And then I don't have any side-to-side motion, but we've already seen that. So now the leg is going to come back up, and then it's going to go side-to-side like that at the knee, and then up and down with the foot, and then pronate, supinate the foot, and then the toes are going to come up. They don't come up very far, but they come up a little bit. And the toes are going to come back down, and then we're going to pronate, supinate again, and then point the foot, flex the foot, and then internally and externally rotate at the knee, and then it's going to come back down like that, and then we're going to internally and externally rotate at the hip. Pretty fucking cool, huh? 3 ranges of motion for the hip, 2 ranges of motion for the knee, like 3 or 4 for the foot. It's pretty fucking cool. So guys, there is the last like 200 days of work for me. It's pretty exciting to have actually finished this and gotten it done. I think I'm on Iron Vlog 215. I think that's right, 216, one of those. I got it done, and it's been a long time, and I literally thought it was going to take me a month to get the thing built, not just designed, built. But I also thought I was going to make a much cheaper and easier version of that, and I realized that's not really me. I got to do it right. So I did it right, and that's what I just showed you, is me doing it right. So it's going to be really cool, and I can't wait to get in there and weld it and actually build it and put the thing on. It's going to be surreal and absurd to put this thing on. I suspect, if I did it right, it to move around me just effortlessly with like water, essentially just flow around me, because it's lining up with the center of all my joints. And that's even without actuators. I literally expect to be able to put this thing on and that's what I'm going to do at the beginning, is just weld it up and put it on and walk around in it. And then I'm going to go back and try to actuate it. So my goal is to build the Mark 1 NP non-powered. That's like what I'm aiming for right now, is to get the non-powered one made and then try to actuate it and then do some other cool stuff. I build some flamethrowers and make it fly and shit like that. It's going to be really cool. But yeah, just getting it welded and put it together is my goal right now. So the next things I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to flatten out all those parts onto a single plane, and I'm going to make a file that is just the flat dimensions of that, and I'm going to send it out to a company here in Colorado that can cut stuff like that, and I'm going to get a quote on how much that costs. And then after that, I'm going to be saving up my money and getting the money to actually achieve that quote and get it cut and built. And then I'm going to build it, and then I'm going to buy it. When I'm going to buy it, then I'm going to bring it together, and I'm going to weld it and put it together, and then I'm going to break out of the cave and become Iron Man. I don't know a better way to end than that, guys. I love you. I love all of my subscribers and you guys that watch every video and comment. You guys mean a lot to me, which isn't all 167 of you or whatever I am at the point of filming this. Not all of you guys watch every video, but a lot of you guys do, and that really means a lot to me. And if you watched all this and you're like, man, that guy is really doing some shit, I'm really inspired and impressed by what he's doing. If you'd like, you can hit the subscribe button. It's right there, and it would help me out, and I'd be really happy to have you on this journey. I think it would be great. I'm gonna do big things. I love you guys. I love all my subscribers. I love all my watchers. You make this easier for me to do. It's a lot of work, and you make it easier for me. You guys are great. Have a good one.